Good morning and welcome to another Bevington Group webinar. My name is Roger Perry. I'll be hosting this morning, and today we'll be talking about becoming a frontier organization. But before we start, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners on the land from which I am broadcasting, speaking, presenting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So, becoming a frontier organization, let's get started. You can send questions to webinar@bevingtongroup.com. You can also click at the bottom of the Q&A screen. Some of my team help in background, but it's often the case that we get to the end without much time to answer questions, if any. So we'll try to answer them behind the scenes if you have any questions. Okay, so today we'll cover what are frontier organizations or frontier firms, but we've broadened it to organizations because it does apply to non-profit entities as well. Many of the features, why do they matter? What makes a good frontier organization? And explore some of the key lessons in the literature and also some of our observations, and talk about how you could possibly apply these lessons as leaders in your own firms. So I'll make a start. So what is a frontier organization? Well, I find it a fascinating concept. It's essentially an organization that the OECD defines as being roughly in the 5 to 10% most productive companies in the sector. So they're the best and most productive. And of course, productivity is in the press at the moment. It's a very important subject and for a very good reason in Australia's national interest. Basically, good productivity will help ensure that future generations of Australians have as good a lifestyle as we do. Now, these organizations benchmark well in efficiency and benchmark extremely well in innovation and are often fast growth, going from small to large very quickly in many cases, industry leaders, trendsetters, and also very effective export markets if they're firm. So if we look at some of the key characteristics, they significantly outperform the average organization. So they operate at a productivity frontier. They tend to be more profitable and younger on average, not the people in them necessarily, but the actual entity itself. But notwithstanding that, often become big very quickly. So they're characterized often internally by being highly innovative, invest in R&D or other forms of experimentation. They're more likely to introduce and patent cutting-edge technologies. Now, they don't all patent, but they're certainly more likely to introduce, and also they're more likely to adopt emerging technologies. Now, there are ways to do it. Just adopting technology in an ad hoc manner will not necessarily help you, but we'll come to that shortly. They often belong to multinational groups. This isn't necessary, but this is helpful because if they develop some good IP, you can actually leverage that network and basically distribute it globally to considerable advantage. This, in some cases, is a challenge for Australia getting to multinational networks, but maybe a little bit more on that if we have time. And many do, as I said, export early and at scale. So that's if you're for profit. We'll dive into a little bit more some of the characteristics. So as I said, they are in the top 5 to 10% of total factor productivity, so they're productive. They have sustained productivity as well. It's not just a flash in the pan one-off, it's sustained, and this was tracked by Andrews et al., a Treasury paper as early as 2016. Policymakers have known about this for quite some time. They export and R&D intensities, as I've said. But if you looked inside, you'd note a number of things. You'd note a high investment in intangible assets, software, branding, organizational capital, patents, and the use of cutting-edge technology. So they create IP and they use IP. And organizations with a high share of revenue from new products are often frontier firms. So they produce new stuff. And they're prepared to capitalize their own markets. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a sec. Management quality is high. So they hire well, they teach well, and they take management capability very seriously. There's also plenty of target setting, monitoring, HR practices, which involve mentoring and coaching. They're very dynamic. so they can sense, seize, reconfigure assets, and move in a changing environment. Now, if you've listened to our resilience papers, you can find those online. Um, adaptivity is a key part of resilience. Your ability to survive long enough for you to adapt locally is important. So you might need some buffer capacity and then transform. So that's what you can expect to see. So let's look at some examples. Unsurprisingly, lots of US examples, particularly in the tech and digital area. So Apple, NVIDIA, and Microsoft actually all qualify. We have Atlassian here in Australia, which also qualifies. That's in our top 5 or 10% in terms of productivity. It's not just tech companies. There are manufacturing companies like Toyota that's long been considered a frontier firm. Siemens is considered a frontier firm. We've got Tesla in the manufacturing space, and of course, they don't always have smooth riding, and Tesla hasn't had a particularly smooth ride of late. But we've got an Australian manufacturer, the likes of ResMed, for example, has long been considered in that category. But of course, even ResMed can have a bumpy ride from time to time if you look at its share market performance. In health and biotech, CSL, that wouldn't surprise too many people. That's considered a frontier firm. Pfizer in the US in that medical space. In retail and logistics, it's not going to surprise anyone that Amazon's a frontier firm which continually invests in new ways of doing things. Not many folks here would know about Ocado, a robotic grocery fulfillment system, and AI warehousing, JD.com from China. Okay, so those gives you some examples of the sorts of firms that we're talking about. Now, how does Australia stack up? What does it matter? What about us? So we're a smaller market. We've got a smaller number of frontier firms. The unfortunate thing about us at the moment is our frontier is not quite as frontiersy as the rest of the globe. Certainly that was the case up to 2016 research, and we were actually scanning for an update in this. But the other measures in and around it would tend to indicate that that's still true. So productivity in our frontier firms is slower, or has been slower than that for global firms. So for global firms, productivity between 2002 and 16 increased 60%. It only increased 25% for us. This might be a feature of the competitive intensity of the Australian market. But there's sort of other things at play. So we do tend to be in the research slower in adopting cutting edge technology. Those who've been watching us knows we've been encouraging people to do the opposite, to come up with an AI strategy and execute it, for example. And our frontier cohort is relatively small. Now, some of this is size of market, some of it's other factors, but we are smaller, and that's just a fact. And there are some structural reasons as well. But notwithstanding that, we could do better. And technology adoption in an intelligent way might be a way for us to do so. And there's been plenty in the press recently about adopting AI to do so. So what can we say about productivity in the relationship with the frontier firm? Well, we can say that producing more effective frontier firms, and even more of them if you were to think about a global scale. So we might be a frontier firm in Australia, but not a frontier firm globally. If we were to produce more global winners in that sense, that would really help our productivity performance. And as I said, that's important for future well-being of Australians. So Australia ranks amongst the lowest in the OECD for labour productivity. I think we were second lowest when I last looked. And product growth, as I said, is important. If we have more firms with frontier firm features, even if they don't get on the global rankings, that still helps us enormously. Now, but to do so, we need some things to be true. And one of the things we do need to be true is investment. Businesses would need to invest, because you'll have seen that investing in R&D, new ways of doing things, new technologies, and getting a return for it, they get a productivity return, but the investment is an important feature. Risk aversion, I'm going to skip on government spending because the relationship between that, I think, is too complicated to discuss in a brief session. But risk aversion is probably hindering process. So we have a conservative culture. It's partly because the way our governance systems work and the legal structures in and around that. But in terms of adopting new technologies, there are lots of research pieces in our degree of conservatism. And given you've seen what the features of a frontier firm are, the ability to adopt tech and use it intelligently. We'll talk about intelligent use. Just grabbing it doesn't help. Essentially, that's unhelpful. So, by the way, at the back of this, there are research papers that I'm relying on here to some extent, as well as personal experience, although the Bevington experience matches this very nicely, will be issued when we issue the pack for those who want to do more reading. So some of the research basically looks for root causes. It looks on reasons why we might be falling behind that productivity frontier and why we might have somewhat less effective frontier firms. So Australian organizations adopting technology slowly, but also potentially declining business dynamism is referenced in the literature. And we recently had a session with Saul Eslake, who talked about this. There are all sorts of ways to think about dynamism, but in this particular case, there's an economic way to think about it, which is basically poor firms exiting the market and good firms entering the market. And it is actually harder to get productivity in the services sector, but it is possible. So they might be some of the reasons. But what do we do? What do we do? Well, early technology adoptions is definitely a classic feature of a frontier firm. And what are people saying about the technology du jour, the one that's in the press all the time? And of course, that's AI. And there's been some really interesting statements from Australian and global leaders recently that are worthwhile reflecting on. So the CEO of Xero, Cassidy, said it's not the future, it's here now. Matt Coleman from Commonwealth said there's a big difference between big companies that are navigating the transition to AI well and successfully and those that aren't. He also believes the potential disruption by AI is material over a 3 to 5 year time frame. We also have some very interesting international comments, particularly about job replacement. So essentially, Michael Harnett, Bank of America, said that either companies adopt AI or will basically be less profitable than their competitors. And by doing so, that means taking the productivity benefit. And I think that means basically people losing their jobs. There are other pieces of research that says, well, if you just actually go straight for the sugar hit and use AI to take people out of your firm, you'll have less longer term productivity. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes' time. But either way, there's much said about AI. And the thing about it is, it's a principal example of early adoption or not. And we can use it to think about effectively ways firms can get more productive and approach that frontier firm concept. Now, if you've been watching our webinars, you'll note that we have said in the past that it's worthwhile thinking carefully about where you adopt AI and actually applying the big investments where they're likely to make the most difference because it's not cheap. So be strategic. We often recommend value driver trees, which is breaking down the sources of value till you find a lever that you can pull. And it's not difficult to find AI that can help you in pretty much any space of your operating model. So you can take that operating model in. So you can say, well, I want to play in the people space. I actually want to play in the supply chain space. What is it and where in your organization do you want to play? And it's important to think about a portfolio of AI projects because they won't all work. And you want to have a portfolio which is some are more risky, some are less risky. And you do want to think about speed so you can get some things done quickly. And you do want to think about risk. And in some of our other materials and other webinars, we go through how you can think about filtering. But either way, you've got to get stuck into it. And what we're saying is you've got to have a thoughtful way to get stuck into it. And here are some examples of organizations that have certainly been thoughtful as to how they're deploying technology. So be it Moody's that got early into Gen AI, despite unclear use cases, be it Intuit that embedded AI into products like TurboTax, which has been very handy for it. It's interesting, I checked their share price before joining this call. And over the last 5 years, it's gone from 300 to close to 800 US dollars. It's actually very impressive. Adobe's transitioned from box software to cloud-based SaaS. Levi's doing data analytics and personalization to personalize customer experience, and the list goes on. So, and of course, IKEA right in the middle, it's become an absolutely iconic global brand, and it's moved from catalogs to digital first retail, really embracing the digital journey, including AR for home visualization. You can actually visualize what things will look like in your home. So what about those who haven't done so well? Now, I said that it's not just about applying at random digital technologies, AI, or other technologies in your business. It's helpful to be considered. And it's also helpful to be courageous. So if we look at some of these failed examples as markets moved on technologically, Blockbuster just failed to pivot from physical rentals to streaming, and it rejected a Netflix partnership. Now that's a failure to see how technology could change a market. Now, Kodak's a different example. It actually invented the digital camera, but feared cannibalizing its film business. So a very different story. Somewhere in that organization, it saw something that was useful, but it failed to line up its management or make the courageous decision to cannibalize its own business. So it's not just about using the tech, it's about using the tech intelligently and taking courageous decisions. BlackBerry, there are many of you who will remember the BlackBerry. I certainly do, with the tiny little keys. And it decided to focus on enterprise security, which by all means was important, but it ignored the trends to usability. And it got well and truly trounced as a consequence. Toys R Us outsourced online sales to Amazon, but failed to build its own digital capabilities. And therein lies a lesson which applies to AI as well, which is you do need to build your own digital capabilities. And Xerox, which developed an early PC at Park, but failed to commercialize it. The tech was there, but again, the strategic vision and courage was not necessarily there. So with the frontier firms, it's not just having tech, it's using it, developing it as required, and using it intelligently and courageously, but certainly not foolishly, but intelligently and courageously. So that's the necessary piece. Now, if we're thinking of AI and the need to intelligently choose, reflect, point yourself in the right direction and act courageously to appear to have and to genuinely have more of the features of a frontier firm, even if you don't get there globally, closer you get, the better off you are. One thing to point out is things are moving really fast in this space. Now, of course, things are always moving fast, but they really are moving very fast. This is a bit of a snapshot in this slide. I'm not going to go through all the detail. I'll send you to sleep. But effectively, you've got some big events for each period of time in here. So, and the short periods of time, March to May, you know. So effectively, just a few months, just a quarter, and a huge amount of announceables in each quarter of improvements in the AI space. Now, that's just the surface stuff. There's lots of activity on very specific AI applications for specific industries, which we'll come to in a few minutes' time. So this means that adaptivity, the ability to adapt, is going to be an important feature. But also, if you just look at the number of major platforms that are offering services, one of the key decisions is to choose which platform that you want to jump on and you want to invest with. So AI adoption is certainly accelerated. It's continued to get a lot of public attention, but we're not miles on in Australia. We could certainly do better, but notwithstanding that, 58% of Australian CEOs have recently said that they're now prioritizing AI investment. So we're on the move. Many organizations are currently piloting, some are scaling, and many that we work actually have already deployed significant AI capability. There are lots of specific use cases. It's not just Copilot. It's not just It's not just general purpose AI, although that's very useful. Um, it's specific applications. So in retail, it might be dynamic pricing. In banking, it might be help with compliance reviews, etc. But there's certainly a steep learning curve, but we are on the move. And the key thing from a frontier firm perspective is it's likely to become a foundational capability. So if we look at some of the tech companies that consistently do well, so let's take Duolingo for an example. They've said that they'll gradually stop using contractors to do work that AI can handle. Spotify have said, well, for new hires, the Spotify CEO said, well, for new hires, you've got to prove that AI can't do the job. Radical. Klarna in the banking space actually had a 22% drop in headcount deliberately. They did what's called a leapfrog. They actually did the redundancies and then tried to fill the gap. That's not what they said originally, but that's actually what they did. So you can see leading firms adopting this in a very aggressive way in some cases. Klarna possibly a possible slip, but aggressively pursuing AI and basically that example of intelligent use. So we've argued the case it's not just grabbing tech, it's intelligent use of tech. You can have it but not use it. You can have it but not have the judgment or the insight or the courage to deploy it. But also even internally with productivity use, there are intelligent ways to do it and less intelligent ways to do it. So let's think about AI for automation as an example. And this is from an MIT paper, MIT Sloan Management Review to be precise. And effectively, rather just slamming AI in for productivity, the case that is argued, and this is certainly how we practice it, is that you start with the work, not the tech, because there's AI for so many things. There are just tens of thousands of models out there that may be useful for you. You start with the work, not the tech, and essentially you figure out how you're going to restructure the tasks. And that's how you start thinking about automating. And they've outlined 5 steps, as you can see here, but it starts with the tech. That's sorry, people do start with the tech often when they actually should start with the work if they're thinking about automation. So what are we doing? What does the process look like? Can we improve the process? Then how do we automate? And there are plenty of options in automation. So one thing that is worthwhile saying, though, in pretty much every industry, the leaders are already landing on the really big opportunities or some of the really big opportunities for them, though they don't stop. In healthcare, it's been medical imaging for a while. In manufacturing, predictive maintenance is becoming mature. In education, it's personalized learning. In transportation, it's route optimization, cybersecurity threat detection, energy, smart grid management, and the list goes on. So in the AI space, there is already plenty of maturing happening. And if you look at the leaders in most industries, you'll see that they're already doing something. All right. So the main argument from that section is, well, if frontier firms use technology, how? And the short answer is intelligently in a considered well, but certainly courageously, and if necessary, prepared to cannibalize. But that degree of intelligence applies right down to designing processes, which is not just chucking a technology at it, but start with the tasks, the processes, and then apply technologies once you've decided how they're going to work. All right. So it's not just the technology, but technology enabled. The way organizations work within the enterprise, so not just the decisions they make as to how they do things or what products to launch, also makes the organization a frontier firm. Now, this is research that was published in HBR, and you can see leading organizations working differently. And I'll just highlight a few points here. They do increasingly tend to build human AI workflows, and that includes in decision making. They're good at cross-discipline collaboration. They tend to follow lean principles, and that's lean and agile both. So they're customer-centric, they're focused on innovation. The customer lens helps guide the innovation, and it's very purpose-driven as well. They're agile and do experiment. The unit of innovation is now the task. So we talked about that. That's an increasing trend. People think, particularly in productivity, about the task as the unit of innovation because there's so many options on how to innovate it. So they're redesigning the work, not just the tech. They very closely align their AI rollout with the purpose, and they think carefully about their policy and AI strategy. So an AI strategy is extremely useful, and it's a great way to communicate with your staff about how you're doing as well, because the key insights can be drawn out for it. So an AI strategy is worthwhile considering where you're going to play, how you're going to play safely, and what it means for you, for the people who work with you and for you in the future, and as well as what it means for your customers, of course. So the ways of working will change. Now, one of the key things that's worthwhile pointing out, therefore, if the way of working in here, is it all brand new? Well, actually, no, it's not, because they're frontier firms now. So yes, they're using tech. They tend to basically have an innovative mindset. So in this slide, the key piece that I pull out is the frontier isn't just a place, it's a mindset. So the shift isn't just technological, it's organizational. So they tend to collaborate well across organizational boundaries. They tend to operate well in a cross-disciplined way. They tend to have good ways of thinking about prioritization. They tend to have innovative ways of thinking, not just about the tech, but strategy, how a technology will change the market and how they should experiment to get there. Now, I would remind people who have seen it, and for those who have, I'll briefly explain it, the idea of a barbell strategy. Not every experiment will work, and frontier firms get this. And so that means that in a portfolio of projects, you are prepared for some to fail. And you have two types of projects, and this is Taleb's idea of a barbell. You have a project that's more likely to succeed, and maybe it's just improving something you've already got, left-hand side of a barbell, like a weight, the weightlifter would use, right-hand side of a barbell, more innovative projects where you know the cost of it, but you don't know the upside. And frontier organizations, by definition, must have some deeply experimental work, some work where they know the cost, but have no idea really what the upside is going to be. That means that the way to build a traditional business case for some of these just won't apply because it's hard to estimate the benefit. So you do have to accept failure. So that's a mindset piece. So that's a very important thing to point out. Okay, I've talked a lot about rethinking the work. This really is going to be important because frontier firms are basically getting that productivity edge by rethinking the work. They're deconstructing how work is done. They're thinking about what bits can be improved just in process. Then they're thinking about how to automate certain pieces, and they're reconstructing workflows. And if you just think Amazon and the way it's deconstructing and piecing together supply chains and transport, that's a classic example for the no supply chain of the way a frontier firm thinks. All right. So to talk a little bit more about agentic AI, which is now, it's not just a single model, this is the new frontier for frontier firms. So, and effectively, it is worthwhile noting that this is where they're going next. So it's not just a single model, but basically a coordinated use by AI of multiple technologies, if you like, which means increasingly, just so you get a sense of where we're going, they'll be more autonomous, the agents. They can self-direct. They can adapt to complex environments. They can make decisions. You've got to be careful as to what you allow them to make decisions for. They've got persistent memory, so they can remember how they performed and basically take a feedback loop and improve over time. There are lots of applications. So automation, medical decision support, multi-agent collaboration within financial services, and so forth. All right. So lessons. Frontier firm, very important for productivity. It's got lots of features. It adopts technology, but it uses it intelligently, and it works in a certain way. It's got ways of working that are helpful, and it's certainly well aware of what's coming up next. So what gets in the way? unsurprisingly, leadership's important. So uh, I had the pleasure actually of talking to a CEO just a couple of days ago who knew an enormous amount about AI and was very crystal clear about the way that organization was going to go. So you do get it around, and you get it around increasingly leaders who are very clear on how they're going to use AI and very clear on the need for it. So, but of course, it's not the only technology out there. You do need others. You might get some cultural resistance, certainly skills gaps, although they're certainly addressable. Silo thinking is possibly one of the biggest problems, and it's the biggest problem not just for AI deployment, but in productivity generally. And bear in mind, a productivity firm or a frontier firm is a highly productive firm by definition. It might be costly, so financial constraints, although you can start small. It might be legacy systems, although you can put a wrap around those. It might be that the efforts are superficial. Now, this is a big thread, and we see quite a bit of this, which is innovation theater, which is a thousand flowers bloom, lots of experiments, but nothing that's really going to stick, nothing that's going to make a difference. And the more dynamic the market you're in, the more likely you are actually to innovate. So, so the organizational barriers really, to my mind, come down to the way you lead and the way you structure your enterprise are the two things that you can do. So rigid job structures, traditional role structures, and that don't allow room for innovation get in the way. If you are fearful of technology, and none of us need to, it's all very learnable. You may be reluctant to apply AI or any other tech. A lack of task level innovation. So not thinking about a task, but just chucking AI at something rather than designing a solution might be a problem. General organizational inertia, for example, the belief that because you've got legacy systems, you can't do anything with tech. Well, that's increasingly untrue. In fact, you can also, if your legacy systems, for example, create a data quality problem, you can get stuck into that in ways that don't necessarily involve replacing your legacy system, including using AI to clean up your data, and leadership gaps. So most things eventually come down to leadership, with many leaders underestimating the strategic value of these new technologies. And I'm going to finish on the leadership role. So you need cultural change to basically adopt new technologies on an ongoing basis. That requires strong leadership. There's plenty of evidence of that, and 91% of data leaders cite cultural resistance as the main barrier to change. And there are plenty of examples of when leaders fail. So Zillow, which should have done better, it's an AI-driven home pricing led to a $300 million loss, poorly implemented. AI Canada chatbot mishandled, and the Queensland State Library actually had a bit of a fail as well. So what we see here is potentially, because it's hard to get inside these, I think what we're seeing in these failed examples is simply misapplication of them. So not having the pieces in place. So there are three pieces, if you've been watching others webinars, that you need. You need an AI architecture to help you play it safe. You need a strategy that helps you know what direction to point in. And that's not just the use cases, but the principles that you're going to deploy in choosing your use cases and how you work with your staff, your key stakeholders, along with your customers. And then it's also about then how do you organize internally to do that? And some of these folks haven't organized internally well. I'll finish on this. So leadership attributes that help, because there'll be plenty of leaders on the call here, leadership attributes to help a positive risk culture. Now that means that you know their risks, but you're deploying risk intelligence. If you haven't seen our risk intelligence webinar, I would highly commend it. Because risk management does help you manage risk. Risk intelligence helps you choose the right risks. So risk intelligence is truly and deeply strategic, and it's well worth getting your head around the concept. And I think it's certainly something that most CEOs should be aware of, and that'll give you a positive risk culture. What is a positive risk culture? As Anthea Roberts, the academic, refers to it, it's 3 R's, which is you're aware of risk, return, and resilience. Now, Scale Agile and Lean Startup principles are helpful because they help you with cross-discipline collaboration. Simple as that. You have to champion it from the top. We are seeing much more of that coming out in the press. We looked through some of the examples earlier. You have to drive change across tasks, technology, and teams. If you just whack on a tech, it may not be that helpful. It might even be disruptive. Think about the tasks that you're doing and then deploy. You certainly should be prioritizing along a long-term vision, but leave room to adapt the vision because no one knows the tech's going to end. And really adopt the growth mindset in your leadership style, which is that point of exploit today and explore tomorrow. It is possible to succeed. And some of the barriers, even legacy systems, there are ways to work around, particularly some of the data problems that emerge from that. We don't have time to address that now, but it is indeed possible. Call us if you need more information. All right, I am going to stop there. And with just a quick summary, so organizations that lead tomorrow, they're already redesigning work today. So they're frontier firms. They outperform. Australia's falling behind on some of the metrics. They're certainly falling behind on the productivity metrics, which would indicate the frontier firms, there either aren't enough of them with frontier firm features to pull this up, or they're falling a little bit behind. The earlier research indicates it's a little bit of both. AI is not plug and play. You've got design work to do. Transformation can start small while you're building the muscle by all means, and you do need to make a move. Where would you start? Well, you can start on the right if you wanted, which is redesign your workflow, start with the pilot, focus your efforts, and empower and measure. There are other webinars that we've done on how to build an AI architecture, how to think about prioritizing as part of a strategy, and what to consider in terms of building your own AI capability. Now, we focused on AI here, but bear in mind, it's only one of the many technologies that a frontier firm would use. I hope this has been helpful. We'll close it off for there. I hope you have a wonderful Friday. Thank you for joining us.